Garner. So this week, our last week of class, we read the book Tell Me by Kim Adonisio. And it's basically just a book of poems. All of them are kind of not really intertwined, more like they all just kind of have the same theme. And they're sectioned off into 4 sections. The first section is The Singing, the second is Blue Door, the third is Last Call, and the fourth is called Good Girl. Personally, my favorite section was probably the Blue Door sections, which is section 2. I started marking the pages of poems that I really liked as I was reading, and when I got through the second section, I noticed that pretty much all of the pages for this section were turned down, just because I just loved this section and the way that Adonisio wrote about this particular time in her life. Most of them seem to be about, I would assume it's about her divorce, but they all seem to be about like lost love. And I just find it really interesting that she could tell the story of this great love that she had that was lost in so many different ways. My favorite poem in this section was probably the poem at the end, and it's the poem that she named the section for. It's called Blue Door. It says, "Today I passed the house we rented last summer. It was only a glimpse as I drove by. Blue door, adobe arch painted with flowers. In memory, your dusty van is parked on the gravel and you're standing at the stove while I curl on the couch with a book, pretending to read, but secretly watching you, loving how you look. Intent on our meal, on getting it right. How clearly I can see everything. Cars passing on the road outside, you shirtless leaning over the cast iron pot. Me holding a few useless words in my hands. Nothing I say will make you stay with me. Nothing erase how you'll turn toward me, offering the wooden spoon so that I get up and come to you and taste the salt on my tongue." And I just really liked how that poem started out with describing this house that her and her husband, boyfriend, lover, whoever, rented last summer, and it starts out by describing that, and then it goes into her seeing them in this house still and how they were when they were there. And it's kind of like a reflection poem, like she is remembering how things used to be, though they're not that way anymore. Another one in this section that interested me was the first poem in the section, titled Near Heron Lake, and it goes, "During the night, horses passed close to our parked van. Inside I woke, cold under the sleeping bag, hearing their heavy sway, the gravel harsh under their hooves as they moved off down the bank toward the river. You slept on, though maybe in your dream you felt them enter our life just long enough to cause that slight stirring, a small spasm in your limbs, and then a sigh so quiet, so close to being nothing but the next breath. I could believe you never guessed how those huge animals broke out of the dark and came toward us, or how afraid I was before I understood what they were, only horses, not anything that would hurt us. The next morning I watched you at the edge of the river, washing your face, your bare chest beaded with bright water, and knew how much we needed this. A day ahead with its calm lake. We would swim in, naked, able to touch again. You were so beautiful, and I thought the marriage might never end." And this poem kind of sets up the Blue Door section for like the rest of the poems, for the loss of love and everything, by describing such a beautiful time for them together. And then all of a sudden there's this turn at the end where she says, "And I thought the marriage might never end." And that shift at the end was very heavy, kind of. With the way that the rest of the poem went, it seemed like a very just like nice time, just a very happy time. And then all of a sudden there's this turn where you realize the marriage is going to end, and that the love will be lost. And I think that sets up the rest of the section very nicely for the next 6 or 7 poems that are in this section about lost love. Something I noticed in the first section that was kind of cool with one of these poems was the poem A Childhood. I thought it was interesting the way that Adonisio set this poem up. It's 6 stanzas, and every couple of lines in each stanza repeats from the stanza before. So it reads, "Our drinks came with paper umbrellas. My mother put on tennis whites. My father went to the bar the way he always did. My mother put on tennis whites. My brother threw me against a wall the way he always did. I believed in my guardian angel. My brother threw my mother against a wall. I walked in my sleep. I believed in my guardian angel. I woke up far from the house. I walked in my sleep. My mother read fairy tales and sang to me. I woke up far from the house. My mother was old, my father dead. My mother read fairy tales and sang to me. My father and brother crashed through the door. My mother was old, my father dead, along with my guardian angel. My father and brother crashed through the door. I went to the bar, along with my guardian angel, and our drinks came with paper umbrellas." And this poem really interested me from the very start. It's one of the first few poems. I think it's like the, 8th poem maybe. But it kind of drew me in just in the way that the repetitiveness of it shows like the cycle kind of childhood through your adolescent years and into your adult years, and how a lot of the times it all just comes full circle. And it starts out with the paper umbrellas and it ends with the paper umbrellas. And I think that Adonisio did a really, really good job of showing that like cyclical aspect of childhood and of life in general, by taking the 2nd and 4th line of each stanza and making them the 1st and 3rd of the next stanza. So there's that repetitiveness throughout the poem that kind of gets you going into this cycle of over and over again, and you know what's coming next, and you know which line is going to be next because it was in the previous stanza. And that's kind of how life is, and that's what the author shows here. And then the fact that the first line became the last line, and it showed that it all just comes full circle by using the line of "our drinks came with paper umbrellas." And I just thought that it was really interesting how the author showed that through this poem. It was honestly probably one of my favorites in the book, in the whole book, just because it has such that, just because it has that meaning behind it that I think most people can get, and most people understand that life is very cyclical, kind of. It's very not repetitive, but like it can come like full circle very easily, and it often does. And I think that was shown really well in this poem. So my final thoughts on Tell Me. I am really glad that there was a book of poetry in this class. I'm not the biggest fan of all poetry. I am very picky when it comes to poetry. It's very hard for me to find poems that I actually really like and actually really can grasp. And I think that Adonisio, the way she writes is really interesting, and the style that she uses with like her poems is really honestly great. And I don't typically go out of my way to find poetry. I read a lot of books. I read a lot of fiction and nonfiction. but I don't typically go for poetry just because I do have such a hard time finding poetry that I like and poets that I like and poems that I can actually relate to and understand without having to go through hundreds of others that I don't get or I don't understand or I don't really relate to, even if I do understand it. So I'm glad that this book of poetry was in the syllabus for this class because it kind of forced me to step outside of my comfort zone and to read an entire book of poems by this author that I've never heard of before. And it definitely was eye-opening. And I think maybe in the future I won't necessarily try to avoid poems as much after this book, especially by this author at least.